Welcome to Make a Difference with RJ channel. Reading Asset Allocation with a Real World Constraints, CFA Level 3 Core Syllabus. Since this reading is smaller than the previous one, we are going to take a lot of examples with this. So see, so far we learned how to do the strategic asset allocation using different models, but those were the theoretical parts, and not everything theoretical part can be implemented in the real world. Issues like asset size, liquidity needs, time horizon, tax consideration, rebalancing needs to be considered very carefully. So we will look at each points in the next slides. Then we have adjusting strategic asset allocation. What happens when the strategic asset allocation strays, or there are some crashes or some changes in the belief, and then there are behavioral issues. This becomes a problem when there is a smaller fund, then lack of expertise to invest in complex product is less and may have restrictions from government to buy certain products. On the other hand, a larger fund has higher level of expertise, economies of scale, but may not be able to invest in certain products like small cap, alternative fund, and large trade might have high price impact. For example, there is an endowment fund which has $50 billion AUM and wants to invest in a small cap in India, which has $500 million market cap. Now the floating shares are 25% only, which is approximately $150 million. To invest in these even 5%, the price impact may be very, very high. So they will need to be very careful investing these kind of products. So both problems are there when there is a AUM small and AUM large. And there is a liquidity issue. So when we have funds like sovereign funds, endowment fund, certain foundations and pension plans, they have longer time horizon and their liquidity needs are less. So that is all right. They can invest in a growth product. They can invest in a product which has high risk. Even life and auto insurance companies have the predictability of claim. So their liquidity need is less. But banks, they need day to day activity. For the day to day activity they need liquidity, so their liquidity needs are high and they cannot invest in these kind of products where uncertainty is there. Property and casualty insurance also same thing, unpredictability of claim, so their liquidity needs are high. Important in both the cases, liability need and goal achievement. A time horizon is short, then invest in stable asset with a less volatility, and time horizon is long, then invest in growth asset because high volatility can be tolerated. Tax consideration. Each country has a different tax regime, and some common thing about the different taxes are interest income tax is always greater than dividend tax, and dividend tax is greater than capital gain tax. Now this is very common, may not be true for all the countries. Let's take an example here. An investor pays 30% tax rate on dividend income, 30% on interest income, and 12% on capital gain. Now this investor has invested in a bond mutual fund which has given a pre-tax return of 10%. Now this pre-tax return of 10%, out of that 50% of this is interest and 50% is capital gain tax, which is realized in annually. So what is after tax return? Now mutual fund return is 10%. So the 50% of that is 5% taxed at 30%. So after tax return, if we remove 30% from the 5%, we get 3.5%. So this person is taking home 3.5% and 5% from the capital gain, so which is taxed at 12%, lower than the interest income tax. And if you remove 12%, we get 4.5%. So the total after tax return is 7.9%. You can do that with any example. So read the question and write in the comment answer. Okay. Do this for the question number 1 and question number 2. Okay. Tax return and after tax standard deviation both have impact on efficient frontier and strategic asset allocation. After tax volatility decreases due to tax. How's that? See, pre-tax standard deviation is, say, suppose 18%, and if capital tax gain is 20%, then what happens? Standard deviation after tax will decrease. You need to remove the 20% of this 18%, and the after tax standard deviation will be 14.4%. Taxes decreases the volatility, we will need to change in the corridor. The tax corridor should increase. After tax corridor would be 1 divided by 1 minus standard deviation. So example here is if pre-tax corridor is plus minus 5% and standard deviation is 20%, then after tax corridor would be 1 divided by 1 minus standard deviation, that would be 1 divided by 0.8, and our corridor now will change from plus minus 5% to 6.25%. Other strategies we can use is tax loss harvesting. Realize losses deliberately to offset tax gains somewhere. And the another strategy is strategic asset allocation. Use of tax exempt account or tax deferred account. Adjusting strategic asset allocation. When do we change the strategic asset allocation? Because strategic asset allocation is a long term thing, but we still can change it when there are changes in these three different things. Changes in goal. Business cycles may impact businesses and individual change in circumstances. So when the goal changes, we will have to change the SAA. Then changes in constraint. So if there is a change in regulation, or if there is a large cash inflow or outflow, or if there is a job loss or increase in funding requirement, then those constraint will change and that will change the SA. Third is changes in belief. If the change in committee is there, then investment committee will have the belief change, or if there is changes in family mind state, that will also change strategic asset allocation. Tactical asset allocation is done to take short term advantage. So how do we know if the TAS performed? So how to evaluate? There are few ways. First is comparing Sharpe ratio of TAA and SA. The second is calculating information ratio to see how much alpha was generated. And the third is TAA portfolio on SA efficient frontier to see where it is placed. And the fourth is we can do the perform attribution analysis of this. And what are the approaches of the TAA? How can we do the TAA? We can do the TAA by margin borrowing, short selling, or volatility indices. Behavioral issues, and look at the behavioral issues using examples. Here we have Vishal who has invested in a stock that has been underperforming for over a year. Although his advisors suggest selling to avoid further losses, he refuses, hoping it will recover, as he can't bear the thought of locking in losses. Sounds familiar? So, which behavioral bias does Vishal demonstrate? It is loss aversion. This is a tendency to prefer avoiding losses, meaning losses feel more painful than gains feel satisfying. You can pick winning stocks by closely watching market trends and reading company reports even though he has no professional training in finance. He is convinced that his decision will consistently outperform the market. Which behavioral bias is Mark most likely exhibiting? Illusion of control. So this bias occurs when individuals overestimate their influence or control over events, especially in areas with the random outcomes like investing. Sarah places her inheritance in high risk account while keeping her savings in a low risk retirement account. Although both are part of her retirement accounts. Which behavior bias does Sarah demonstrate? It's a mental accounting. So people categorize money into separate accounts based on subjective criteria. The Tina invests heavily in a new tech startup because it reminds her of past success stories like Google, Facebook, assuming it will perform similarly just because it's in the same industry. So, what do you think about this bias? It's a representative bias. In this, people make judgment often leading to assumptions that past trends will predict future outcomes. Hina is choosing between two investment funds. Fund A highlights 90% chance of gains while Fund B mentions 10% chance of loss, even though both have the same risk. See, 90% chance of gain means 10% chance of loss, and Fund B 10% chance of loss has 90% chance of gain. She chooses Fund A, swayed by the positive framing. So, which behavior bias is Hina demonstrating? Framing bias. Here, decision in this bias are based on how information is presented, how information is framed. After seeing several recent news reports about airline accidents, Alex avoids flying and chooses to drive long distance, believing flying has suddenly become more dangerous. What behavior bias is Alex exhibiting? Availability bias. In this, decisions are made on data which are easily available or recalled, reading newspapers. So, are you video? Read this question and write it in a comment. Which bias does the Jack display in both the questions? Okay. I have created mind map and you can download it from the link given below in the description. See you in the next video. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe.